In some of my recent videos, I've mentioned how a growing talking point amongst Dead by Daylight's community has been the question of whether or not Behaviour have run out of ideas for killer powers, with Springtrap serving as a major catalyst for said discussion. Well, since then, a lot has happened in both the game itself and the DBD space, with the conversation continuing and now progressing away from Springtrap. While a surprising amount of people have begun discussing the treatment of Sadako and teleports ever since I brought it up in that same video, there's been a different trend in killer design that's taken centre stage: dash killers, or as the community has lovingly coined, dash slop. I say lovingly coined because while there are some genuine and valid criticisms, it seems that most of it is tongue-in-cheek, playful jabs at Behaviour's current obsession. Or at least was playful, until Behaviour very recently took things a bit too far, turning the consensus from "haha, isn't it funny how this ability keeps happening?" to "Jesus Christ, they're actually going to turn every killer into the same thing," leaving the community in disbelief. It reminds me of when Fire Up was so bad that we jokingly said they should nerf it, and then they actually did it. To start things off, everybody seems to be having a hard time defining what a dash is, but I'd say it's pretty simple. A dash is when the killer itself is moved forward at a faster speed and high acceleration with no option of moving backwards, while still susceptible to blockage via collision without traversing over obstacles, otherwise it would then be a leap. So for a few examples, Victor. While his ability does rapidly accelerate him forward at high speed, it also lets him jump clean over pallets, windows and certain loops, so therefore it's a leap, not a dash. The Nurse. While she does travel in a straight line at a high speed, she's completely unaffected by collision, as blinking isn't a dash forward but instead just a teleport with a transition animation in between. Bubba. While he does move faster than normal while chainsawing, there's barely any acceleration, and he has complete freedom to move in any direction, even backwards, so it's not a dash. And the Pig. Although she has completely unrestricted camera turning and the ability to strafe freely, she does have very high acceleration and absolutely cannot move backwards, so it is a dash. With that out of the way, we can finally begin. Dashes have always been a part of Dead by Daylight, with the Hillbilly being present since day one of release. Funnily enough, dashing has always been particularly popular, especially so back in the early days. While we very rarely ever got any form of official stats from the early days of the game, anecdotally from playing back then, most people would agree that the Hillbilly was easily the community's favourite. Of course, it wouldn't take a genius to figure out that when there's only 3 killers in the game, or 10 if we expand our time range, you're going to see Hillbilly more often than when there's 40 killers in the game. But even back in those days, he was loved by both killers and survivors alike. It seemed like the creation of the Hillbilly was executed perfectly, just like this perfectly executed segue to today's sponsor, Raycon with the essential open earbuds. Keeping up the trend of bringing you luxury listening experiences at affordable costs, the essential open earbuds give you that classic Raycon sound you know and love, but in an ultra lightweight, open design, so you can tune into your favourite music without sacrificing your awareness. Particularly beneficial for people with sensitive or small inner ears, these ones hook over the top of your ear and never enter inside, so there's no risk of pain or irritation. This time around, the batteries last even longer than before, coming in at 36 hours with the charging case, so you can really keep things moving. This handy bit of kit isn't only for listening to music though. It also comes with an inbuilt microphone so you can take those important calls at any moment. It even has digital signal processing to keep you sounding crisp and clear. Surprisingly enough, I even found that they stayed on just fine while laying down, so ASMR is still an option for those of you who can't live or sleep without it. Click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/ardethaopen to get 30% off the essential open earbuds. Thank you again to Raycon for sponsoring this video. So why exactly was Billy so popular back in the day? Well, it's simply because he was both strong and fun. For starters, his mobility was leagues above anything that any other killer could do. In fact, it would stay that way for literal years, with the only potential competition being Nurse with her old range add-ons. This alone already made him fun, but the fact that his dash could also be used during chase to curve around loops and potentially insta-down just served as the cherry on top. He was also great to play against as he applied high pressure during chases while still having fair counterplay and being well telegraphed, with the potential exception of the Insta-Rev add-ons which I've spoken about before. He was high skill, high reward, which people generally like. The Hillbilly would remain as our only dash killer for 1 year and 7 months, until the 23rd of January 2018 when we saw the release of the Pig, with her crouch stealth, dash and reverse bear traps. The Pig was nowhere near as much of a success as the Hillbilly for a few reasons. The biggest factor though was her strength, or lack thereof. She was simply a mid-tier killer upon release, nothing special. Then, after a barrage of nerfs over the course of the next year or so, she dropped from mid to straight up bad. So that's 2 out of 11 killers with dashes so far. Nothing too crazy. Our next dash killer would funnily enough also be 1 year and 7 months after the previous one, with this one being the Demogorgon. This release was much more successful than the Pigs, mainly due to the fact that the Stranger Things chapter was by far the biggest, most successful release that Dead by Daylight had seen so far. People were pretty happy with him, even if he wasn't particularly strong. Of course, he was definitely better than the Pig after her 20 plus nerfs, but not even close to the Hillbilly. Just a mere 2.5 months later, on the 3rd of December 2019, we'd see the release of the Oni, a killer that had many similarities to the Hillbilly. The Oni's Demon Dash was, at its core, quite similar to the Hillbilly's Chainsaw Sprint. It allowed him to dash from one side of the map all the way to the other uninterrupted, with restricted turning, that also allowed him to insta-down a survivor at the end of it. However, what made the Oni different was that he could also stray from side to some extent during the dash, and he could also perform a lunge attack at the end of it, with the ability to curve it around bends too. But he wasn't simply a better Hillbilly, there was a counterbalance. He couldn't use this ability freely, he had to fill up a bar to use it. This did fill up passively, but extremely slowly, so the main way of accessing his ability was by injuring survivors and collecting blood orbs. Then he could use his ability once the bar was full. So kind of like an easier, more forgiving and lethal Billy Dash, but at the cost of having to earn access to the ability instead of having it active 24/7. Reception was again quite positive, and while you didn't see Oni every single match like some other characters that we'll talk about shortly, the trend was getting clearer. Dash killers tend to be pretty successful releases, when you don't repeatedly pulverize them with a sledgehammer for an entire year straight. Then there would be a small pause in the release of dash killers, with the next one not coming out until 9 months later on the 8th of September 2020 with the Blight. Despite his absolutely awful PTB where he was practically unplayable, the Blight absolutely took over Dead by Daylight, with insane mobility that could keep up with, or maybe even surpass the Hillbilly, incredible chase pressure, ungodly huge hitboxes giving him hits around corners, and some of the best add-ons in the game. He became one of, if not the most common killer at high skill lobbies, while still seeing a fair amount of play in more casual lobbies too, due to how fun people found him. If you're a DBD player yourself, you'll know that the Blight is still incredibly popular, incredibly strong, and incredibly common to this very day. From here, it took another 9 months to cook up DBD's next dash killer. On the 30th of August 2022, we got Wesker. Anybody who played back when Wesker first released will likely be getting flashbacks right now, because when I say Wesker was popular, I mean he was really, really popular. Not only was dashing as fun as always, but the ability to grab survivors by the throat, extending your dash even longer, and then watching them splat after you've smacked them into a wall was so satisfying and even more fun. Due to this incredibly fun ability mixed with his badass design, survivors would find themselves playing against Wesker exclusively almost every single match for, and I'm not exaggerating here, multiple months. And it's not hard to see why. His core gameplay loop is fun to play as and well telegraphed to play against, being far stronger than the Pig and far less frustrating to play against than the Blight, but he was also blessed with some extra goodies that behaviour didn't plan for. Bugs. But not the bad kind like Houndmaster for example, no, beneficial bugs that allowed him to do things he wasn't originally intended to do, the most famous of which is the slide tech, which allows him to dash sideways along loops, earning even more potential hits. Now that may still sound like a bad thing, bugs allowing him to get kills he wouldn't normally get, but the thing is, these bugs are really hard to do, like frame perfect inputs that take a lot of skill and practice to pull off. This is nothing like the Blight's old hug tech for example, which completely removed his only counterplay and could be achieved by simply looking down. While Wesker might not be the #1 strongest killer in the game, I think most people can agree that he is the killer with the #1 highest skill ceiling, so playing him can be very Moorish as you practice and practice to hit some of these insane techs. The next dash killer followed suit 1 year and 3 months later on the 28th of November 2023 with Chucky. This one wasn't as much of a success. While initially he did release to a very high spot in the tier list and lots of play, he was quickly nerfed and in turn plummeted much lower in the tier list and popularity. But why was he nerfed? Well, while dashes are fun and he was strong like Wesker was, Chucky was also incredibly easy to play as and quite oppressive to play against, so the community's reaction was strongly negative due to him getting great results with very minimal skill required. The Unknown released next, a killer without a dash. But this is when things got crazy and when Dash Slop really took over DBD. Following the Unknown, we'd get Vecna, Dracula, Houndmaster and Kaneki back to back, and while I don't personally count the Houndmaster as a dash killer, as she herself doesn't dash, instead leaving it to the dog, most people do count her, and there's no denying that the dog does indeed dash. That's 9 months straight of killers with dashes, and while they did have other aspects of their kit too, the trend is definitely there. It wasn't until after the release of Springtrap, a non-dash killer, that people really started picking up on it. When mixing the lingering frustration of Kaneki just being an absolutely miserable character to play against with the rise of the term Slop, the community saw the steady rise of the term Dash Slop. Obviously, the term slop isn't anything new, but it's recently been popularized by people using it to describe the use of generative AI to pump out lazy, low-effort garbage, slop, trying to reap the benefits of being a talented, hard-working artist without actually putting in any of the effort. Of course, the internet did what it always does, and as it became a trendy word, people started using it not really understanding its meaning, and as a result, it slowly lost its previous meaning and is now widely referring to something I don't like. For example, friend slop, a term used to describe games that rely on banter with your friends for them to work. While I personally don't like that genre of game, as it's fun with friends is hardly a selling point, every game is fun with friends. In fact, most things in general, games or not, are fun with friends, but that hardly means that every game in that genre is lazy trash. Although I probably shouldn't have broken it down that much, because in the case of Dash Slop, it really wasn't that deep. It was a community's light-hearted, playful way of saying, hey, isn't it funny how we've had so many dash killers lately? I hope the next one is somewhat unique. To be honest, it was quite nice to see the DBD community having some light-hearted banter with each other, especially with the absolutely absurd amount of terrible controversies the game has had lately. Seriously, the controversies are non-stop at the minute. As I type this sentence, people have just found a job listing on BHVR's website looking to hire a programmer to join the generative AI research team, with many people now worried that DBD will follow the same path that Black Ops 6 did, with shitty AI art and trying to replace real voice actors. Anyway, back to the topic. As the term Dash Slop hit peak popularity, BHVR announced that the long-awaited Michael Myers rework was due to release soon, with it being included in the next PTB alongside the newest killer. Continuing the banter, the community started saying, I can't wait for the devs to turn Myers into Dash Slop, or whenever any minor grievances with bugs or balance came up, people would just respond with, no worries, BHVR will give it a dash and the problem is solved. These jokes would continue until the 3rd of September 2025 with the release of the 9.2.0 PTB, where we would get our Myers rework and the jokes would come to a stop. Because it wasn't a joke anymore. They actually fucking did it. BHVR genuinely gave Michael Myers from the Halloween franchise a dash. Remember that time in Halloween when Myers dashes full pelt at Laurie? Because I don't. At this point, the Dash Slop meme went from a light-hearted joke to a somewhat concerned, more alarmed phrase. If things kept going like this, it's only a matter of time until the game becomes Dash by Daylight. That being said, this PTB did come with some of the biggest changes and most aggressive changes in DBD history, alongside an entire new killer, the Krasua. She has a fucking dash. No, wait, she has 2 dashes. You can't make this up, I swear. It's like the jokes write themselves. So for those of you that didn't get to play the PTB or are watching in the future and she's maybe had some changes, in the PTB her head mode had Headlong Flight, which is a dash similar to Vecna's but had no collision with survivors, so she could easily body block pallets and windows, and her basic attack in head mode was replaced with another dash that could deal damage if the survivor had reached tier 1 of infection or higher. Now, despite all this, there is still some degree of banter to the Dash Slop meme, as to say the Krasua is the same as the Demogorgon, for example, is just completely ridiculous. But it's just funny how every design BHVR comes up with at the minute boils down to this. I wouldn't even be surprised if we got Dash merchant at this point.